Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cole, as Mr. Nunez had mentioned about some of the other things that have come out about leaks and so forth, could you, because my constituents asked me the difference in maybe what the Attorney General did in going to the court to on the Rosen case, saying that he was an unindicted co-conspirator, because that was actually about a leak also. What type of process or internal review did y'all go over before you asked for those phones to be tapped? And to make it perfectly clear, that was not in a FISA court. Is that correct?
Number one, that was not a FISA court. In the Rosen case, there were no phones being tapped. It was just to acquire a couple of emails, and there is a very, very robust system. It's set out in regulations that the Department of Justice follows of the kinds of scrubbing and review that must be done before any subpoena like that can be issued. You have to make sure that you've exhausted all other reasonable avenues of investigation, that's done before you even get to the decision about whether or not such a process should be used. You have to make sure that the information you're looking at is very, very tailored and only necessary, truly necessary, to be able to move the investigation forward in a significant way. There are restrictions on what can be done with the information, and it goes through a very long process of review from the U.S. Attorney's Office through the United States Attorney, him or herself, into usually the criminal division of the Justice Department, through the Assistant Attorney General of the criminal division, through the Deputy Attorney General's office, and up ultimately to the Attorney General's side. This gets a lot of review before that's done under the criteria that we have in our guidelines and our CFR.
So the DOJ didn't, because of it being a security leak, the DOJ didn't contact the FBI or the NSA, or there was no coordination with that. It was strictly a DOJ criminal investigation.
Well, the FBI does criminal investigation with the Department of Justice, and they were contacted in that regard, but it was not part of the FISA process. It did not involve the NSA.
And I think that's what we need to be clear of, is that it was absolutely not part of the FISA process, and that is a lot more detailed and a lot more scrutinized as far as getting information than what this was. Is that correct?
Well, they're both very detailed and very scrutinized processes. They have different aspects to them, but they're both very unusually, frankly, detailed and scrutinized, both of those processes.
Thank you. In general, going back to what Ms. Sewell had asked about the difference of clearance that you would have with a contractor or a government employee, when you have 1,000 different contractors, I mean, I know from my experience on having had one of my staff go through a security clearance, it's a pretty detailed operation. And I know that this gentleman had previously, I believe, heard that he had worked for the CIA. Had there been any further clearance given to this individual when he became a contractor after he left the employ of the CIA?
No additional clearance. He had what is needed to work at NSA or one of our facilities, a top secret special intelligence clearance. And that goes through a series of processes and reviews. The Director of National Intelligence is looking at those processes to make sure those are all correct. And he stated he's taken that on. We support that objective. But to work at NSA, whether you're a contract, a government, civilian, or a military, you have to have that same level of clearance.
Does it bother you that this gentleman had only been there for a short period of time? Or is there any oversight or review or whatever of the individuals that are carrying out this work? Is there any type of probation time or anything? Because you know, it seems that he was there a very short period of time.
So he had worked in a couple positions. He had just moved into the Booz Allen position in March, but he had worked in a information technology position for the 12 months preceding that at NSA Hawaii. So he'd actually been there 15 months. He'd moved from one contract to another.
So would he have been familiar with these programs at his previous job?
Yes, and I believe that's where going out on what we call the public classified web servers that help you understand parts of NSA, that he gained some of the information and took some of that. And I can't go into more detail.
Mr. Westmoreland, if I just might
Yes.
make one point there. When you say would he have become familiar with these programs, I think part of the problem that we're having these days is that he wasn't nearly as familiar with these programs as he's portrayed himself to be. And this is what happens when somebody who sees a tiny corner of things thinks that it gives him insight and visibility into the whole program.
Thank you. Now yield back.